October the 20th, 1942. The United States government issued Vesting Order number 248. Under the authority of the Trading with the Enemy Act, the federal government seized the assets of a New York investment bank called the Union Banking Corporation. The reason? The bank had been found to be operating in the financial interests of Nazi Germany. Among the bank's 7 directors, listed by name in the seizure documents, now declassified and available in the U.S. National Archives, was a man called Prescott Bush. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is not internet speculation. It is a documented, verified, government-confirmed historical fact, buried in court records for 60 years, finally confirmed by the Associated Press, The Guardian, and Britannica from declassified National Archives files. And it is the foundation of the most powerful political dynasty in modern American history. This is the story of the Bush family. 3 generations, 1 dynasty, and the question America never properly answered. The grandfather, Prescott Bush, was, by any measure, a man of immense establishment credentials. He was a Yale graduate, a member of the elite secret society Skull and Bones, a golf partner of presidents, and a managing partner at Brown Brothers Harriman, which would become, and remains today, the largest private investment bank in the world. He was also, from the mid-1920s onward, a director and shareholder of the Union Banking Corporation, a New York investment bank that had been established in 1924 to manage American financial interests on behalf of a German industrialist named Fritz Thyssen. Thyssen was not simply a wealthy German businessman. He was, in the words of his own 1941 memoir, a book he titled I Paid for Hitler, the primary private financier of Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Thyssen had poured millions into the Nazi Party through the 1920s and 1930s, believing, as many of Europe's industrialists did at the time, that Hitler was a useful weapon against communism. He funded the party's political campaigns. He funded its paramilitary apparatus. He helped build the machinery of a regime that would go on to murder 6 million Jewish people and drag the world into the deadliest conflict in human history, and the American bank managing Thyssen's U.S. financial interests. Transferring, according to documents confirmed by Britannica, funds, bonds, gold, coal, oil, and steel to Nazi Germany during its military buildup was directed by Prescott Bush. The seizure documents confirmed that Bush and the other UBC directors were in fact nominees, phantom shareholders, acting at the direct behest of the Thyssen family and their Dutch bank. They were not passive bystanders who happened to share a boardroom. They were the mechanism through which Nazi-linked capital moved through the American financial system. When the U.S. government finally moved, on the 20th of October 1942, more than 10 months after America had entered the war, they seized UBC's assets under the Trading with the Enemy Act. They also charged Prescott Bush with violating that act. He was never prosecuted. The government, as one University of Pittsburgh professor explained to the Associated Press, was, in his words, too busy trying to fight the war to pursue the case. And so Prescott Bush went on. Brown Brothers Harriman went on. The money went on. When Fritz Thyssen died in Argentina in 1951, the U.S. government released the frozen UBC assets back to its shareholders. Prescott Bush received $1.5 million for his share. The following year, he was elected to the United States Senate, representing Connecticut. No one asked a single question. The son, George Herbert Walker Bush, from Yale to the CIA to the White House. George Herbert Walker Bush was born in 1924, the son of Prescott and Dorothy Bush. He was, by all accounts, a genuinely remarkable man in his own right. On his 18th birthday, he enlisted in the Navy. He flew 58 combat missions in the Pacific. He was shot down by the Japanese in 1944 and rescued at sea. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was a war hero. That is not in dispute, and it deserves to be stated plainly. After the war, he followed his father to Yale. He joined Skull and Bones. He studied economics. He graduated in 1948, turned down a position at his father's firm, and drove his young family to Texas to seek his own fortune in oil. What he found in Texas, aided in no small part by his father's connections and capital, was Zapata Oil, co-founded with a former CIA officer named Thomas Devine, backed by Prescott Bush and other establishment investors. Named, interestingly, after the Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. George Bush became president of Zapata's offshore subsidiary, And from that platform, he began building a political career that would eventually take him to the very top of American power. He served 2 terms in Congress from Texas. He was appointed U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. He served as the envoy to China. He chaired the Republican National Committee during Watergate. And then, in 1976, President Gerald Ford appointed him director of the Central Intelligence Agency. The son of a man whose assets had been seized for trading with the Nazi enemy was now the director of the most powerful intelligence organization on Earth. In 1980, George Bush ran for the Republican presidential nomination. He lost to Ronald Reagan. Reagan then chose him as his running mate. For 8 years, George Herbert Walker Bush was Vice President of the United States. In 1988, he ran for president. He won. The 41st President of the United States of America. Son of a man who had helped move Nazi money through the American banking system, charged with trading with the enemy, never prosecuted, handed $1.5 million from frozen Nazi-linked assets, elected to the Senate, and whose son now sat in the Oval Office. Not one journalist in a major American outlet thought to make that a campaign issue. Not one. The grandson George Walker Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, inherited a dynasty and a name. He also inherited, on September the 11th, 2001, the worst terrorist attack in American history. On that morning, 19 hijackers, 15 of them Saudi Arabian citizens, none of them Iraqi, flew 4 passenger aircraft into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a Pennsylvania field. Nearly 3,000 people died. The world held its breath. And the Bush administration made a decision. They would go to war, not just in Afghanistan, where the Al-Qaeda network behind the attacks was based, but in Iraq, a country that had played no role in September 11th, led by a dictator named Saddam Hussein who had been, in previous decades, a U.S. ally. To justify that decision to Congress and to the American people, the administration made a claim. Iraq, they said, possessed weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, biological weapons, a nascent nuclear program. Secretary of State Colin Powell presented the case to the United Nations Security Council on the 5th of February 2003. He held up a vial he said could contain anthrax. He showed satellite images. He made arguments that have since, in his own words, become a permanent blot on his record. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq began on the 19th of March 2003. The weapons of mass destruction were never found because they did not exist. Multiple bipartisan government investigations subsequently confirmed this. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, the 9/11 Commission, the multinational Iraq Survey Group's Dualfer report, all of them reached the same conclusion. Iraq had abandoned its weapons programs in 1991 and had made little effort to restart them. As the Center for Public Integrity concluded after reviewing more than 900 false statements made by senior Bush administration officials in the 2 years following September 11th, and I quote, "The Bush administration led the nation to war on the basis of erroneous information that it methodically propagated. Methodically propagated. Not mistaken, not misled, methodically propagated. The Iraq War killed between 150,000 and 200,000 Iraqi civilians in the first 4 years alone, according to various estimates. The conflict destabilized the entire Middle East. It created the power vacuum that allowed the Islamic State to rise. It cost the United States over $2 trillion. It resulted in the deaths of nearly 4,500 American service personnel. And at its foundation was a claim that was false, made by the grandson of a man who had been charged, but not prosecuted, for financially supporting the enemies of America in a previous world war. The pattern, once you see it, is very difficult to unsee. The story of the Bush family is not a story about evil men. Prescott Bush may not have known, or chosen not to know, the full implications of managing Nazi-linked funds through a New York bank. There is no evidence he was a Nazi sympathizer. The documents do not show direct ideological alignment. George H.W. Bush was a genuine war hero, a skilled diplomat, a man of considerable intelligence and institutional loyalty. In 1919, a royal commission asked William Vesey, the British meat baron who had fled Britain during the First World War, to avoid paying taxes, a direct question. Are you not to pay anything for the advantage of living here? Vesey's answer, as we explored last week, was effectively no. The Bush dynasty never answered a similar question either. Next week on Blood and Sterling, a British family whose patriarch built a global empire from a single garage, and whose tax affairs are currently under investigation for up to £500 million. And yet their yellow machines are building the road outside your window right now. subscribe,